Hello everyone, thanks for having us here today. One of the themes that you're going to hear throughout this presentation is the theme of opportunity and how this allowed us the opportunity to create coastal wetland restoration work on the Canadian side of the Niagara River. So I'll start with a little bit of background on the Niagara River. So this particular watershed has always been very important. It was back in the 1880s, the Niagara River became the first waterway in North America that was harnessed for large-scale generation of hydroelectricity. Now this access to readily available energy allowed for a lot of development, including mills and factories along the upper Niagara River. Now this in turn led to water quality issues, and there were a lot of very early signs about problems in the Niagara River. So here are a few quotes from 1916. The pollution below the falls is gross. 1918, the effects of the pollution in the lower Niagara is to render the river water totally unfit for human consumption unless it's purified. So there were some very early warning signs. Now this continued to progress. By the 1970s, we had over 700 chemical plants, steel mills, oil refineries that were discharging over 250 million US gallons of wastewater into the Niagara River each day. This led to several well-known events, such as the Love Canal evacuation. It also led to heightened public awareness and protest, which led to demand for political action to address these water quality issues. Now this feeds back into our theme of opportunity, because it was this demand for political action that led to the signing of several agreements. So in 1971, we had the Canada-Ontario Agreement, which was focused on reducing algae. 1972, we had Canada and the United States sign the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement, and both countries committed to addressing nutrient loads in the lower lakes. There was also some revisions to the Great Lake Water Quality Agreement. In 1978, it was broadened to include a focus on toxic substances in the Great Lakes. And in 1987, both Canada and the US committed to restoring the ecosystems where there are impairments to fish and wildlife, as well as concerns over undesirable algae, beach cleaning, and as well as other issues. It was at this time that the concept of area of concern was introduced, and this was a term that was used to describe those areas that were most degraded within the Great Lakes. We also had the establishment of remedial action plans to help address those areas of concern, and this brings us to MNRF's role in the Niagara River RAP, which was focused on fish community assessments. Now, in 2016, the MNRF produced a fisheries report summarizing the findings of several years of electrofishing surveys. So the objectives for the upper Niagara River, including maintaining a self-sustaining population of native warm water and cool water fish species to support a recreational fishery, as well as with a focus on smallmouth bass, muskie, walleye, yellow perch, as well as northern pike being the prominent species. Now, it was interesting, through the fisheries assessment, we noticed that the upper river was designated as impaired because it really seemed to lack the diversity in the top predator species, especially walleye, which was a target top predator in the Lake Erie fishing community. So we mostly saw smallmouth bass, largemouth bass, and some muskie and pike, but we were really missing the walleye in our sampling in the upper Niagara River. Now, one of the limiting factors for why we were seeing this limited amount of diversity was likely to do with the limited amount of coastal wetland habitat within the Canadian side of the upper Niagara River. Right now, currently only 8% of the Canadian shoreline includes coastal wetland habitat. Now this brings us back to our theme of opportunity, and there's the saying that opportunity seldom knocks twice. So we were very fortunate that once again we had this opportunity to create coastal wetland habitats. So what we did was this involved engagement of several partners. So recognizing that coastal wetland habitat was a limiting factor, what we did was we also, at this point, we knew that there was work being done on the New York side. So there are some great examples to use as reference. We also recognized that most of the shoreline on the Canadian side was owned by the Niagara Parks Commission, so it was very important to get them involved in this particular restoration project. We also recognized that this would be a costly endeavor, so what we did was we reached out to Environment Canada to try to secure some funding, as well as to supplement the funding that we were receiving through COA. So what we did was we reached out to Corey at the Niagara Parks Commission and got him interested in the project. So we aligned a tour with the New York DEC to get some ideas and to have a tour of the restoration work that was done on that side of the river. Now Corey was very interested and he saw the potential in this. So we lined a second tour with his director to get him involved in the project as well. Now when all the partners were interested, we then reached out to a consultant to come up with designs for the coastal restoration projects. Now this is a map showing those sites. There are 7 plans that were drawn up. Now the Ushers Creek and Baker's Creek were completed in 2017. Gonders Flats, which is in green, was actually completed this past winter, and we've got drawings designed for the other 4 locations. Now this is just an image of one of the sites that was selected. So we chose, in most cases, we chose sites that were at the mouth of tributaries feeding into the Upper Niagara River. Now, just a question, does anyone know what this particular species is? So I've heard it from a few people. So this is the emerald ash borer. Now we also like to think of this as opportunity. And at this point, I'm going to pass the presentation over to Corey. He can provide a bit more details about the coastal restoration work, as well as explaining why this particular invasive species became an opportunity.
Yeah, thank you, David. So emerald ash borer, in a weird way, is probably one of the greatest things that happened to Niagara Parks Commission. For far too long, we were too concerned about tourism, the revenue generation. Our mandate is protected Niagara River corridor. So when the ash trees started falling, people took notice, including our commission, and we needed a break. We had about 70,000 trees we had to cut down, and we needed a good news story. So when I was approached by the M&R, it actually worked out really well. And I was able to easily sell this in a time that looked like our habitat was getting destroyed, that we can utilize some of these ash trees. So on our property, we have several woodlots. A lot of them have about 80% ash. Obviously, it's a problem. Safety, habitat loss. So our guys, we had to increase our forestry staff to start addressing this. So this is actually Gonders Flats. So I'll explain. So based on the drawings, the concept drawings that were provided by the M&R, we had the consultant do further construction drawings. And we chose the first 2 sites were at the creek, the mouths of these creeks. And the idea is that they had good seed sources for native vegetation, so we try to get that to settle into the river. So that's why you get the red arrows there. The woody structures are also protecting the wave action. So it actually worked out quite well. Even with the waves coming towards the shoreline, it's still migrating along the shoreline and settling sediment. So basically what we did, our forestry guys, we were cutting these trees down anyways, and we had an opportunity to use them. So we stockpiled a whole lot of ash. In the first year we used about 120, the second year we used about 140. The problem is now they're actually getting too dead, I guess, so they're actually getting too brittle. So we're actually having to look at other trees. Fortunately we have 1,400 hectares to harvest wood off of, or that we are always maintaining. So we also use a lot of boulders. The idea is that we're anchoring these trees into the river, the ash trees, Then within the ash trees, there's also, parallel to the shoreline, conifer trees. These are actually recycled Christmas trees that were gathered after in early January from the region, and we were able to get them shipped to us. So we used several hundred of these trees lashed together, so kind of sandwich effect, and then with these boulders. And they're all cabled together, so you can't see, but underneath right now there's actually conifers as well, maybe at the top left corner there. So the idea is that this will probably last, we know, about 5 to 6 years before they start rotting away. But hopefully by then we'll have enough sediment built up and the vegetation will take hold. So there's kind of two strategies. So one was along the shoreline itself, like sweepers. So kind of softening the shoreline where we could. Historically, a lot of the shoreline in Niagara River was hardened off just with rock. That was the easy solution for erosion control. What we're finding is obviously that's starting to fail. So we've actually pulled a lot of this rock out into the river itself. Then the other side was using these offshore sweepers to create that buffer and creating this hopefully wetland, coastal wetland habitat in between that. So this is an example of the nearshore side. So along with the actual habitat restoration, we also did shoreline remediation. So we did some brush mats, native species. An idea, Niagara Parks has a new goal that we want 75% of the shoreline to be native vegetation. We have a lot of vegetation, a lot of it's invasive, so it's our next 10-year endeavor. So this is after 1 year. So already we're finding vegetation. Within 6 months, vegetation was actually taking hold amongst the trees. Birds are using it, so there is vegetation you can probably see in there. The concern we had is that we're aligned with several landowners. A lot of these are $1 million homes. They care about their view and view only. So it was a big endeavor to get this sold to the community. So we spent about almost 2 years kind of communicating what we're doing. It won't look too bad. I still have my concerns that we get a lot of complaints. And to be honest, it was well received. Had virtually no negative complaints. Fishermen are already making use of these sites. I actually got a call the first weekend we completed our first 2 sites that there's fishermen fishing right beside the sites. We need to kick them out. I'm like, no, we want them to get the buy-in and let us do our work. So this is after, again, the first year. And the photo David showed as an example, this is actually the same site. There's virtually no vegetation there before in the water, aquatic. Now we're getting sedges and everything coming up, which is I thought it was going to take about 2 to 3 years, and within 6 months we were getting this stuff. So overall, we did, to date, we did 3 coastal wetlands, about 5.5 acres. We're looking to do at least 2 to 3 more in the next couple of years. We've been able to use about 210 ash trees. It's a small dent in the several thousand we're cutting down each year. But we're also making use of a lot of conifers, some from our property, like what I mentioned from the region. Over 540 tons of boulders, lots of live stakes and native plants, and we're going to continue adding the buffer width. Again, as a park, historically we've always mowed right to the edge of the river. It's getting that change that mindset and changing the landowners along the parkway that we're not just being lazy, we actually want to manage this properly. We know that vegetated shorelines are actually beneficial for long-term erosion, so we've noticed that quickly and getting that mindset change. So to date we've done about 750 meters of shoreline, and we'll probably add at least 300 to 400 to that the next year or so. And then the monitoring will come back to David. So, thank you.